The transport ship rumbled as it descended onto the landing pad of the Galactic Marine Academy, the most prestigious military training facility in the known universe. Inside, Jack Carter sat stiffly, his fingers curled into fists. He could feel the weight of the stares from the other cadets, tall, imposing beings with thick skin, glowing eyes, chitinous exoskeletons. He was the only human among them, and they made no effort to hide their disdain. A guttural chuckle echoed from the seat across from him. A massive, reptilian warrior, scales shimmering under the dim cabin lights, grinned at him with a mouth full of teeth. Didn't think they still let humans in, the alien sneered, his deep voice thick with amusement. Must be getting desperate. Jack didn't respond. He had expected this. Humans were rare in the Galactic Marines, often dismissed as weak and fragile compared to the towering behemoths that made up most of the ranks. He had spent years preparing for this moment, training his body and mind to prove them wrong. The ship's AI was crackled to life. Final approach. Welcome to the Galactic Marine Academy. Prepare for disembarkation. The transport landed with a jolt. The doors hissed open, and the cadets stepped onto the platform, the alien air thick and heavy with an artificial scent. Before them loomed the academy, a sprawling complex of steel and stone, illuminated by blue energy conduits pulsing like veins across the structure. Above, warships hovered silently, casting long shadows over the new recruits. A voice like rolling thunder boomed across the landing pad. Move, worms. You are now property of the Galactic Marines. Jack turned to see the drill instructor, a warrior towering over them, his four muscular arms folded across his broad chest. His skin was a matted blend of black and crimson, his tusked face twisted in a perpetual scowl. He stepped forward, eyes scanning the line of cadets with barely restrained contempt. Pathetic, he growled. I see nothing but weak flesh and overgrown insects. Half of you won't last a week. And you? His piercing yellow eyes locked onto Jack. The instructor stomped forward, stopping just inches from him, his breath hot and foul. They let a human in. He barked out a sharp laugh. Must be a clerical error. A few snickers rippled through the ranks. Jack clenched his jaw, forcing himself to stay still, to not react. He had heard it all before. The drill instructor's gaze lingered a moment longer before he straightened. You think I'm impressed that you crawled your way here? That you somehow believe you belong among warriors? His voice dropped, venomous. You will regret stepping foot on this world. Without waiting for a response, he span on his heel. Cadets, form up. You will begin your initiation now. The first test was endurance. The cadets were marched onto the Academy's vast training grounds, where an obstacle course stretched across an endless horizon of sand and jagged metastructures. It was designed to weed out the weak, thick mud pits that swallowed those too slow, electrified walls that forced cadets to climb with precision, and gravity zones that fluctuated between unbearable weight and gravity. Jack gritted his teeth as they ran. The heat from the artificial sun beat down on him, sweat pooling at his temples. Around him, the aliens barely seemed fazed. A towering brute pushed past him with ease, his four powerful legs barely struggling against the train. A sleek warrior leaped gracefully over obstacles that Jack had to scramble over with sheer force. By the halfway point, Jack was falling behind. His lungs burned, his muscles screamed. He could feel the drill instructor's gaze on him, waiting for him to fail. Come on, human, one of the reptilian cadets sneered as he passed. Give up. You're not built for this. Jack forced himself forward, pushing harder. He refused to quit. He focused on his advantages. Humans weren't the strongest or the fastest, but they were adaptable. He studied the patterns, watching how the gravity shifts affected movement, how the other cadets navigated the course. When the next field engaged, he launched himself with precise control, adjusting, rather than flailing like some of the larger, heavier cadets. He used agility instead of brute strength, slipping past obstacles instead of smashing through them. Slowly, he started gaining ground. By the time he reached the final leg, he was ahead of several cadets who had underestimated him. But the last challenge was the hardest, a sheer vertical wall, slick with moisture and pulsing with brief surges of electricity. Most of the stronger species climbed it effortlessly, using their claws, extra limbs, or sheer muscle power. Jack had none of those advantages. He took a deep breath, analyzing his path. Instead of attacking it, he ran at an angle, using momentum to gain as much height as possible before grabbing hold. He swung, using his body weight to propel himself upward rather than just relying on strength. The wall crackled with energy, he adjusted, pausing just long enough to avoid the surges. Van by van, he climbed, his fingers raw and his arms shaking. He reached the top just as the last surge of energy fired below him. He hauled himself over, collapsing onto the ground. A moment of silence followed. Then a grunt. The drill instructor loomed over him, arms crossed. His expression was unreadable. "Not bad," he muttered, just loud enough for Jack to hear. Then louden, "Get up, cadets. You're not done yet." Jack rose, breathing hard but steady. He saw some of the aliens eyeing him differently now, not with open contempt, but with curiosity. He wasn't the strongest, he wasn't the fastest, but he was still standing. The Galactic Marine Academy was relentless. Each day began before the artificial sun had even begun to rise, and the cadets were thrust into punishing training exercises designed to break all but the most elite warriors in the universe. Jack Carter had expected it to be hard, but even his worst nightmares hadn't prepared him for just how brutal it would be. The training grounds stretched endlessly before him, desert plains filled with jagged metal wreckage, deep trenches lined with unstable energy fields, and towering walls meant to be climbed and on live fire. The instructors, towering and merciless alien veterans, watched every movement, waiting for weakness. Jack had already been labeled an outcast. The only human in the entire cadet class, he was smaller, physically weaker, and lacked the natural weapons or armor that so many of his alien counterparts possessed. The others saw him as a joke, an anomaly that wouldn't last. He could see it in their eyes whenever he ran past them, struggling to keep pace with warriors whose bodies were built for battle in ways his never would be. Even the instructors barely acknowledged him, except to occasionally sneer when he fell behind. The first trial of the day was combat training. The cadets were herded into a massive chamber where the gravity would shift at random intervals. They were given blunted weapons, some preferred blades, others heavy clubs. Jack picked up a short, lightweight baton, knowing full well that if he got hit, it wouldn't matter what he was holding. He was told to partner up, and predictably, no one chose him. Instead, he was paired with a massive warrior nearly twice his size with thick kitey armor and mandibles. The fight started with a blaring siren, and the floor beneath them vanished as the gravity switched off. Jack immediately felt his stomach lurch as he drifted, while his opponent adjusted effortlessly. They lunged toward him, swinging a thick appendage that barely missed Jack's head. The impact of the strike sent the air rippling, and Jack had no doubt that a direct hit would put him down. He twisted, using what little control he had to push off one of the floating platforms, narrowly avoiding another attack. The other cadets laughed, watching him scramble. "Run, human. That's all you're good at," someone jeered. Jack gritted his teeth. He knew he couldn't win by brute force. He had to be smarter. He focused on the environment instead of his opponent, watching how the larger warriors struggled with the sudden shifts in gravity. Da was powerful, but he was slow to adjust whenever the gravity returned in short bursts. Jack began moving unpredictably, forcing his opponent to waste energy swinging at air. With every attack Da missed, Jack learned. Then, the gravity caught back in without warning. Da was caught, thrown off balance. Jack took his chance. He pushed off the ground, swinging his baton in a calculated strike toward the creature's vulnerable underarm joint, one of the few weak points in its exoskeleton. Da let out a surprised hiss, reeling back as Jack struck again, this time at the back of its leg. It stumbled, falling forward, and Jack followed up with a final strike to the back of its head. The moment his opponent hit the floor, the training alarm blared, signaling his victory. Silence filled the chamber. The other cadets, who had been ready to laugh at his failure, were now staring in stunned disbelief. The instructors exchanged unreadable glances. Jack breathed hard, his arms shaking from adrenaline. Thou rose, rubbing the spot where Jack had struck. He studied Jack for a long moment, then gave a slow, grudging nod before walking away without a word. That was the first time anyone had acknowledged him as something more than a joke. But the day wasn't over. Next was endurance training. A ran across the academy's unforgiving terrain, followed by a obstacle course. The cadets took off at full speed, some bounding effortlessly across the landscape with powerful legs, others using wings to glide across the rocky terrain. Jack had no such advantages. His legs burned with every step, his lungs heaving as he fought to keep up. Halfway through, the brute from earlier, a towering reptilian warrior, deliberately knocked Jack sideways as he passed. Jack hit the ground hard, rolling through the dirt. The impact sent sharp pain through his ribs, but he gritted his teeth and forced himself up, ignoring the bruises already forming. By the time he reached the obstacle course, he was drenched in sweat, his muscles trembling. The course was a nightmare, walls lined with electrified spikes, trenches filled with shifting sand, and automatic turrets that fired stun rounds at anything that moved too slowly. The other cadets tore through it with sheer force, but Jack knew he had to be smarter. He used momentum to swim under obstacles rather than brute force his way through. He dodged the turrets by watching their patterns rather than trying to outrun them. Where the others relied on power, he relied on adaptability. When he finally crossed the finish line, he collapsed onto his hands and knees, gasping for breath. Around him, the other cadets had already finished, but there were fewer sneers this time. Fewer mocking stares. The drill instructor loomed over him, arms crossed. For the first time, there was no insult waiting on his lips. Not fast, he grunted, his tusked face unreadable. But you're still standing. Jack nodded, still catching his breath. He didn't need their approval. He didn't need to be the strongest or the fastest. He just needed to last. And as he stood up, shaking but determined, he knew one thing for certain. He wasn't done proving himself yet. The next stage of training was combat drills, real combat, not the controlled sparring of the chamber or the simulated battles of the obstacle course. This time, they would fight as teams, thrown into a live battlefield scenario with real weapons. The Galactic Marine Academy prided itself on one thing above all: survival. Only those who could adapt, think on their feet, and endure the brutality of real war would make it through. Jack Carter knew that this was his moment, the one that would determine whether he truly belonged here or if he was just another human who would be forgotten as a failure. The cadets were divided into squads of 5. Jack was assigned to a team that clearly didn't want him. His squad leader was a hulking warrior named, whose chitinous armor gleamed under the harsh training lights. Beside him stood a brute with scaled, dark red skin and 4 powerful arms. The other 2 members were slightly smaller but still far more imposing than Jack, a with claws and a reptilian, with piercing, slitted eyes. They barely glanced at Jack as they prepared their gear. "You follow orders, human," hissed, his mandibles clicking in irritation. "Stay out of the way. Let real warriors handle this." Jack said nothing, merely tightening the straps of his combat armor and checking his pulse rifle. The mission was simple: simulate a battlefield scenario where their team had to capture and hold a command post while fending off waves of enemy drones. The battlefield itself was a massive holographic environment, a city filled with collapsed buildings, burning vehicles, and the distant echo of simulated explosions. The academy used live rounds with stun settings, enough to hit, enough to knock someone out, but not enough to kill. Still, pain was real, and failure meant humiliation. As the signal blared, the simulation began. The squad sprinted through the ruined streets, scanning for hostiles. The first wave of drones arrived, hovering death machines armed with energy cannons. Jack hit cover first, pressing against the remains of a shattered wall. The rest of the squad moved with brutal efficiency, firing their weapons and tearing through the drones with practiced ease. Jack lifted his rifle, tracking a drone as it moved, and fired. His shot connected, sending it spiraling into a pile of rubble. Glanced at him but said nothing. They pushed forward toward the command post, a ruined skyscraper that barely remained standing. The second wave of drones arrived, this time heavier, their shields deflecting most of the squad's gunfire. Jack saw the problem immediately. The others were focusing on brute force, hammering the drones with continuous fire, but the shields were adapting. That was a flaw in their approach. "We need to stagger our shots," Jack called out. "Overload the shields instead of breaking them." No one listened. Growled in annoyance and fired a heavy plasma round, which the drones absorbed easily before returning fire. The blast sent, sprawling, his armor scorched. Jack cursed under his breath and acted. He fired a single shot, waited a fraction of a second for the shield to flicker, then fired again. The second shot pierced through, and the drone exploded. He repeated the process, moving fast, calculating timing. One by one, the drones fell. The squad hesitated. "Do what he's doing," snapped, suddenly realizing Jack's strategy. "Fire in sequence." They adjusted. Within moments, the battlefield shifted. The drones were falling, their shields overwhelmed. The squad advanced, reaching the command post just as the final wave of enemies arrived, combat androids, far deadlier than the drones. These machines fought like soldiers, using cover, flanking, and moving with chilling precision. The first few seconds of the fight were chaos. Took a hit to the shoulder and went down with a roar of pain. Fought viciously, his armor shielding him from most of the damage. The feline darted between cover, striking with precision but unable to hold ground. Jack could see it, the squad was breaking under the pressure. "We need to funnel them," Jack shouted over the gunfire. "Force them into a choke point." Hesitated, his mandibles clicking in frustration, but Jack didn't wait. He moved first, diving across the battlefield and hurling a concussive charge toward a building. The explosion sent debris crashing down, blocking half the enemy force. The rest were forced into a narrow alleyway. Now they had the advantage. Jack took position, firing calculated shots. The others followed his lead. The androids fell one by one. By the time the last enemy collapsed, the squad was battered, exhausted, but victorious. A long silence followed. The simulation ended, and the environment flickered out, revealing the metallic walls of the Academy's training dome. Turned to Jack, his golden eyes unreadable. "You fight like a coward," he said at last, voice low. "But you fight smart." Jack met his gaze, refusing to back down. "You fight like a brute," Jack replied. "But you listen when it matters." Let out a strange clicking sound, something between amusement and grudging respect. He extended a clawed hand. Jack clasped it firmly. The others said nothing, but their expressions had changed. The mockery was gone. The dismissal was gone. They still didn't fully accept him, but they didn't doubt him anymore. As the cadets left the training dome, the drill instructor stood at the exit, arms folded. He looked at Jack for a long moment before speaking. The final test was upon them. It was not just another simulated battle, another endurance trial, or another chance to prove themselves in the controlled chaos of the Galactic Marine Academy. This was the real thing, a live combat mission. The cadets who survived this would officially graduate, earning their place among the elite. Those who failed would be sent home, marked as unworthy. Jack Carter stood among his squad, his rifle gripped tight, his breath steady despite the storm of thoughts raging in his mind. He had fought for every inch of respect he had gained, but now standing on the precipice of his final test, he knew that all of it could be stripped away in an instant. The mission was simple on paper. Infiltrate UN, station A orbiting a barren moon, disable its defenses, and hold the command center until extraction arrived. But there was one complication. The enemy was not drones or simulations. The Academy had chosen real combatants, seasoned mercenaries and rogue warlords who had been given a simple offer. Fight the cadets, and they would be well compensated. These weren't mindless training dummies. They were killers. Jack's squad was deployed in a dropship, the meta-hull vibrating as they entered the station's atmosphere. Stood beside him, securing his heavy plasma rifle. Flexed his 4 muscular arms, preparing for the battle ahead. The feline cleaned her twin blades with eerie precision, while the simply adjusted his armor, his slitted eyes calm. No one doubted Jack anymore, but there was still an unspoken question lingering in the air. Could he survive this? The dropship's doors slid open with a mechanical hiss, revealing the darkened corridors of the station. Warning lights flickered overhead, casting long shadows against the steel walls. The squad moved in formation, weapons raised. Jack took position near the rear, his rifle sweeping the dimly lit halls. The first attack came fast. A burst of plasma fire erupted from a side corridor, forcing the squad into cover. The mercenaries were waiting for them, dug in and ready. Jack spotted movement, a figure crouched behind a crate, preparing to fire. He took a breath, lined up his shot, and squeezed the trigger. His round found its mark, dropping the enemy instantly. Barked orders, leading the charge. The squad moved with ruthless efficiency, cutting down resistance as they pushed toward the command center. Jack fought alongside them, his mind working faster than his body. He called out enemy positions, predicted ambushes, and found ways to turn the station's architecture into an advantage. Then the real challenge began. As they reached the command center, the doors sealed shut with an automated lock. A deep, metallic voice echoed through the station's speakers. "You think this is a training exercise, cadets?" the voice sneered. "This is real war. And you're not ready." Jack recognized the voice. Vaughn, a former Galactic Marine who had turned to mercenary work after being dishonorably discharged. He was a legend in his own right, a warrior who had fought on 100 battlefields. And now he was here to prove that none of them belonged. The lights flickered, then died, plunging the station into near darkness. A moment later, mechanical doors hissed open, and the enemy stormed in. The battle was instant and brutal. Gunfire and plasma blasts filled the air. Jack moved instinctively, ducking and weaving through the chaos. Engaged 2 mercenaries in brutal combat, his massive claws tearing through armor. Fought like a demon, using his 4 arms to wield both firearms and weapons simultaneously. Jack wasn't the strongest, but he was the smartest. He used the shadows, moving through the wreckage with precision. He saw patterns in the chaos, predicting enemy movements before they happened. When one of the mercenaries tried to flank, Jack was already there, taking the shot before the enemy could pull the trigger. Then Vaughn himself stepped into the room. He was larger than Jack had expected, clad in heavy armor. His cybernetic eye glowed red in the darkness. "Not bad, kid," he muttered. "But you don't belong here." He moved fast, too fast. Before Jack could react, was on him, knocking his rifle aside and slamming him against the wall. Peen shot through Jack's ribs as he struggled to break free. "You're human," growled, his grip tightening. "You think strategy makes up for what you lack? You think your brains will save you?" Jack gritted his teeth. He wasn't the strongest. He wasn't the fastest. But he had something didn't expect. Adaptability. He shifted his weight, using the momentum of hold against him. Instead of resisting, he twisted, slipping free just enough to draw his sidearm. Before could react, Jack fired. A single shot, right into the cybernetic eye. Staggered back with a roar of pain. Jack didn't hesitate. He followed up with a brutal strike to the knee, sending the mercenary crashing down. Saw the opening. He lunged, finishing the fight with a single, decisive blow. Fell motionless. Silence filled the room. The enemy forces were defeated. The command center was theirs. Jack breathed heavily, staring at the fallen mercenary. The station's systems flickered back to life, signaling their victory. A slow, heavy clap echoed through the room. The drill instructor stood at the entrance, watching them with an expression that was neither approval nor disappointment, just quiet assessment. "Well," the instructor said, "looks like you're not dead." Jack exhaled, a small smirk tugging at the corner of his lips. Not yet, he muttered. Stepped beside him, giving a grunt of acknowledgement. The others followed suit, standing together as a unit. They had done it. Jack Carter was no longer just a human among aliens.